Welcome, everybody, to another episode. Well, this week's edition of the UGA Sports Call-In Show. I'm your host, Paul Maharry, joined alongside UGA Sports analyst Ben Bachmann. As some of you may know, his name is Choppy over on the UGA Sports board, but he is here with us now. He's got a real name, and we're glad to have him on the show with us. A little different setup. I've moved my office around a little bit, so trying to make sure everything is looking good. And I know I'm not, but I hope everything else is on your end, guys. And Ben's sending out that link to the rest of the group so we can get everybody in here off of Twitter and Facebook and the like. But the topics for tonight, guys, college football, has it changed before our eyes? I mean, it feels like it has. This week has been crazy. Texas and Oklahoma deciding they want to enter into the SEC, the conference that they once downed for so long. They want to now be a part of it. What's going to happen to the Big 12 now that it's essentially 8 teams almost? You can't qualify for conference championships anymore. What's going to happen to that? We're going to touch on a lot of that. We want to get your input for this as well. We can talk about this, and we will, between myself and Ben as much as possible. But the one thing is, we want to get your opinion. We want to see what you guys are thinking, and we want to hear from you guys on this. So let us know in the comment section. As always, the phone line is open, 706-363-3773. We'd love to hear from you guys. And then also, Georgia got a big commitment from Branson Robinson, the 5-star running back out of Mississippi. And Ben's going to break down exactly what all he brings to the Dogs and his skill set, things of that nature. He's been compared to a Nick Chubb numerous times. We'll break down his film and kind of talk to you guys about what Georgia's getting in Branson Robinson. As always, Dave McMahon's going to join us. He's going to have a little bit of Olympic stats for us. I think last time I checked, the University of Georgia was second or third in medals right now at the Olympics, if you're just counting UGA. So stick around for that. And as always, guys, the last topic, but the most important topic, is your questions. We want to hear from you guys, hear what you guys have to say. And as always, the phone line's open, so you guys can give us a call. Leading off, though, Ben, man.
Everything's changing.
Yeah, everything's changing, and it's crazy. I didn't think that we would even be talking about this. Obviously, this week I thought was going to be a slow week. I knew we had the Branson Robinson commitment coming up, so we had something to talk about for the show, right? But the Texas and Oklahoma deciding to essentially leave the Big 12, I think it's all but over now. It just essentially needs a vote, if I'm correct.
And when are they going to be in the conference?
Right. And I've heard, that 2025 is when I think they're officially done with the Big 12. They can buy out, I think, in 2023 or even 2022. So what's going on, Ben?
Well, that's one thing. Obviously, we don't know when exactly. Whether I think they can come in the 2022 or 2023 is the earliest they can come those 2 years. But 2025, as of right now, is when they're expected by then to be in. They're not going to be in later than that. But it's basically, as everyone said, it's a done deal. And all the reports that came up, even though some people said maybe Missouri, maybe Arkansas, maybe one of these schools might vote no, the only school that's voting no is Texas A&M. If you check Twitter right now, Texas A&M is just getting bombarded. If you're a Texas A&M fan, it's bad. You're just being made fun of from all angles here. But
why is that? Why is that? What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, it's because Texas A&M left, and to be fair, this is something we're going to talk about later about the impact of what Texas and Oklahoma could be on football and all the sports, in terms of their winning. We'll talk about that later. But Texas A&M, the reason why they left the Big 12, not just because of money. Obviously, them and Texas make the most money. But not just because that. They wouldn't be the sole school, a Texas school in the SEC, and now they're not that. And to be fair, when you look at Texas A&M before the SEC to now, look at how they're recruiting now. Look at how they're winning now. Look at with Jimbo Fisher. They have a national championship winning coach at Florida State. It's now their head coach. All these things for Texas A&M, you didn't think about that from the 2000s to 2010. But when they joined, it was 2010 and 2012. When they joined in that span, since Johnny Manziel, have taken off. Once they got in the SEC and got Johnny Manziel, they've taken off. Now you have to recruit with Texas, and you don't have the SEC sales pitch. You don't have that anymore. And that's why Texas A&M essentially is like, the only reason we left was to be the only Texas school in the SEC, and now that's not the case. We are basically, to a lot of people, are going to view him as a little brother again.
Well, I guess if I'm Texas A&M, I see where their frustration lies. We decided to make a jump, and we jumped away. We jumped to the SEC by ourselves, and now it feels like you said, Big Brother, Oklahoma and Texas are both now joining us in this conference, and it's like, well, hold on, man. We did this. We went on a limb, and obviously with Missouri when they both joined, but we were the Texas team. We were the one that you guys wanted the big market in Texas. We brought it to you, and now you want a bigger market in Oklahoma and a bigger market in Texas. And I can see why Texas A&M's frustrated, but at the same time, this makes it to where, and I think I saw a report of the SEC trying to grab even more teams, and they might not be done. I don't know if that necessarily is the case, but what did it say? Michigan, Ohio State, was it Clemson?
Florida State and Clemson.
Yeah. If that's the case, college football as we know it, folks, is over. It's like the Premier League in soccer is going to be the SEC. And even if it doesn't bring those 4 other teams, what happens to college football? Because now you're going to have 16 teams in the SEC. You're obviously going to, I would think, you're going to realign these conferences. So what happens, does Auburn stay in the West? Because if you're looking geographically, they should switch over to the East. Where's the cut line? And then does that mean Auburn, Alabama is a yearly rivalry game? Obviously, they're not going to stop playing each other. But you start looking down the list, Bennett, like how does this affect Georgia? And Georgia fights for kids out of Texas. They fight for kids against Oklahoma a lot. And I really believe that you bring in a Texas school which has an endowment of nobody else can even touch the money that Texas has. You bring in that type. Yeah, they have a ton of money.
Number one in revenue.
Right. You bring in a Texas school, and Texas can recruit okay. For whatever reason, they've just been on a terrible last 10 years or so, it feels like. And this could obviously get them out of it. But at the same time, you bring in Oklahoma, who is at the top of their game right now, and Lincoln Riley, and he's now recruiting, and he's saying, hey, look, yeah, we're not playing in the Big 12. I can't guarantee you that we're going to throw the ball for 500 yards every game like we were in the Big 12, but I can guarantee you're going up against SEC competition every year. Do you think this affects Georgia's recruiting at all when this does happen?
I would say it sort of does, sort of doesn't, because this is how I look at it. Georgia's base right now in Georgia, I don't think Texas and Oklahoma, it's going to make it harder to get kids out in Texas. And it's going to make, I think, one in Louisiana's outside of LSU, obviously it's the hardest state to recruit in my opinion. I think all people know it's nearly impossible. Bama will get a kid here and there. I mean, Georgia almost had Devontae Smith, and he actually ended up at Bama. There's like the rare kid there. But when it comes to Georgia geographically, they have the state of Georgia, and right next to it, they have the state of Florida, where if you keep those two bases, those are two of the top 4 states in high school talent, with Texas and with California. I kind of said this. If Texas landed half the top 20 players in Texas, they'd be a top 5 team every year. They don't really need, I was listening to, I think it was Joel Klatt was talking about it. He said Georgia, the Florida schools, the Texas schools, Texas and Texas A&M, and USC, those schools don't have to leave their state to form a top 6 or 7 team in the country every single year. That's the thing Georgia has. Now, Georgia, since Kirby, the one interesting thing is, I looked at, especially in the 2020 class, you could tell he'll have his years where he'll go national a lot for recruiting. Now, in order now to go into Texas and those places and Oklahoma, when there's ever a kid in Oklahoma, if Georgia wins the national championship this year, I don't think there's a single worry in football, because that puts recruiting is going to be so easy for Georgia. Because I said this, I was talking to somebody. If Georgia wins a national championship, the one thing that can work in Georgia's favor and to an extent out is their academics. Georgia's a top 20 public university in academics. That's something they can hold over a school like Alabama. You win a national championship, they actually can hold that over Clemson too by a decent margin. You have that academic side and the winning side, where I think if Georgia wins a national championship, it'll have little effect. That's why, to me, Alabama, there'll be a few kids now that may stay in state at Texas and Oklahoma, which may have an impact now. But I don't think it'll affect, especially if Georgia wins big this year and Alabama, won't have a big effect on them. I think LSU's the one who gets hurt the most. LSU will struggle going into Texas. Because here's the thing about LSU. People have looked at their recruiting. Out of state, they do not do well over the past few years. Even Coach Ogeron, they have yet to land an elite out-of-state D lineman, and Coach O's a D-line coach at heart. That's something that surprised me today. I saw they've landed no elite out-of-state D lineman, and that's his specialty. So I look at stuff and I say that's a state where LSU has to go into. That's a state where Bama goes into. When you look at it, Georgia doesn't go into Texas too much. They'll have a kid or two. They really don't go into Texas. They go on the West Coast for a couple kids. They go to Georgia, South Carolina, Florida. Occasionally you'll see a Bama kid. Tennessee this year with Jordan James and potentially Walter Nolan. I'm looking at that. And then they usually go into DMV. I don't think Texas and Oklahoma until they start winning. Well, Oklahoma maybe, but not Texas until they start winning is going to go into the DMV and get kids. So that's where I look at it and say it maybe for a couple recruitments, like maybe 2 or 3 recruitments, maybe a year, it may affect Georgia, but it really won't affect them in football too much.
If this happens, and I think everybody knows it's going to, I just want to see what the ripple effect will be. And guys, if you're watching, the line's open. I think I missed a couple calls while we were doing our opening segment. 706-363-3773. Please be sure to give us a call back. I promise you I'll answer it this time. We were just in the middle of the opening there. And guys, as always, comment in the comments where you're watching us from. We love to hear where you're watching us from. Do we have any Georgia, Texas fans, or any Georgia fans in Texas or Georgia fans in Oklahoma? If you're out there, give us a holler. Let us know what the talk of the town is, so to speak, out there in those 2 states. Also, if you're anywhere else, just put in the comments where you're watching us from. If you have any questions about this and you don't feel like calling in, please put them in the comments section. We'd love to answer any questions that you have, because right now, I think we all have questions too, because this is such a huge, I don't want to overstate it and I don't want to pump it up, but it is really a huge, huge deal for what's going to happen, or what college football is going to look like in the next, 3 to 5 years, because you've got what's going to happen with the ACC. Is the Pac-12? What's going to happen with the Big Ten? Can we finally change the names of these conferences, because the Big 12 has 8 or will have 8. The Big Ten has 12. It's confusing in and of itself. What's going to end up happening? And I think what you're going to see is, I think this Big 12 whatever is, with Texas and Oklahoma now leaving, I think there's going to be a mad dash to either fill up that conference. Obviously, the Big 12 and the Big 12 commissioner does not want that conference to go away. So there's going to be a mad dash to get teams like maybe UCF, Houston, things like that into that to the Big 12. Or does the Big 12 just really vanish in front of our eyes, so to speak? And then the next thing you know, you start seeing you only have 4 power conferences. It's just going to be really interesting to see, especially with how NIL has come about, how this whole Texas, Oklahoma to the SEC has come about. Now you've got the college football playoff. They're talking about expanding it. We're not going to see the same college football that we saw 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Obviously, last year was a little weird, but 2 years ago, we're not going to see that anymore. So what is it going to look like moving forward? I want to get your guys in the comment section. Let us know what's going on with that. We've got some folks, Ben, before I get to you. Loy Dog says Blackshear, Georgia. Jerry Dogs fan says Doe Run, Georgia. Ohio Dog says Go Dogs. Brett Weimer down there in St. Mary's, Georgia. Clifton Royals watching in Norwich, Connecticut. Isn't that kind of up near you, Ben? Close enough, right? No?
Yeah, it's not too far.
Okay, fair enough.
Probably I'll probably say like 10 hours or something like that. I don't know. So that
okay. Well, it's a little it's a little closer to you
than me than down there.
Right. But what were you about to say, Ben?
Oh no, I was going to say 3 really quick points. One, the thing that shocks me most is I think Baylor's in the Big 12. They just won the basketball championship. Texas Tech was like a top 3 seed every year in the tournament the last few years. I'm just thinking for the Big 12, they were actually a really good basketball conference. And now they may not have a conference. That just shocks me that they just had a team win in one of the big 2 collegiate sports. And they have like Texas, this big moneymaker, the biggest moneymaker of them all. And now they might be gone. Now, I would say the thing that most affects Georgia is the schedule. Obviously, it's the schedule. Yeah. Because I would assume Auburn, there's 2 scenarios I see happening. One, Auburn, or 3 sort of to a degree. Auburn is going to have to come to the East, or they're going to have to go into the pod scenario people are talking about, where it's 4 things of 4, which I think the scheduling could get a little bit messy in there. It'd be kind of bizarre, but it does make sense where it would be Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Florida. And then you would have the 2 Auburn schools, the 2 Tennessee schools, and you have the Mississippi schools, A&M and LSU, and then you would have basically the old Big 12 of Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, and Oklahoma. Those would be the 4 pods. Or the divisions. Basically, it's like the AFC, NFC, and pro football. You could do that, or it would have to be Auburn comes to the East, and I guess maybe you get one of the Oklahoma, Texas, or you would have to have Auburn and Alabama. That's probably the worst situation for Georgia, is if you had to play Alabama every year, if they have to get put to the east and Missouri goes west. I think the scheduling hurts. But the thing you brought up, 12-team playoff. I think if it wasn't for the 12-team playoff, I don't think they would have left, if you're being honest. Because
so why not? Why not?
Because think about it. They could be a 2-loss team and get in now. They could, imagine Oklahoma. You lose to it depends on who you play. You lose to Bama and Georgia, or you lose to one of those teams in LSU or something like that. Look at the conference you're in. You look at the teams you play consistently and the programs.
True.
You're going to get in now because now at this point, especially if the Big 12 dissolves, you're probably going to have 5 automatic bids because you have to have your best group of 5 or group of 6, I guess now. And then you would have to have your Power 4 all get the automatics, and then you would have like 6 or 7 at large, and the SEC is probably going to claim half of that, at least.
That's what I'm saying. Like, where does the line stop? And obviously, I mean, if other schools come calling to the SEC and Greg Sankey and say, "Hey, we want in," if Clemson comes calling and says, "Hey, we want in," okay? If Ohio State calls and says,
it's a big one.
That's what I'm saying. Hey, we've got a caller here, Ben. Let's get this.
Oh, we got a caller. All right.
Hey, you're on with Paul and Ben on the UGA Sports talk show, call-in show. Who do we have the pleasure of speaking with?
This is Nat from Marietta. Hope y'all are doing well.
Nat, what's going on, man? We're doing good, man. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And just had a couple of, maybe 3 very quick thoughts on realignment. I guess there are many metrics you could choose to judge this by, but I guess one of the things that we've thought about in the collective conversation is if indeed the 12-team playoff goes forward, I think it's quite possible that the SEC, as it's currently constituted, could get 3 or perhaps even 4 teams in. That's plausible. I'm not sure even if we add Oklahoma and Texas, that number goes up to 5. So I'm not sure that there are many other things to consider. But the access there, the other 2 quick thoughts I had were I'm not sure the recruiting advantage. I think it will hurt A&M. I think Florida and Georgia and Alabama. I think it has been helped us get some Texas kids and some kids from California that we were SEC and other programs were not. And it certainly will hurt A&M. You know, they've got a little bit of a head start on Texas now.
Yeah.
And the NIL thing, they'll be big players in that too. So I don't feel good about that. The last thing real quick is you look at all the programs, some great, some good, that have realigned. I think Texas A&M is really the only winner I can think about of anybody with much traction. I think Nebraska, certainly Maryland, and I know I'm leaving out somebody, I'm not sure about Colorado.
Yeah.
I'm not sure people are better off, and a lot of things are going away. Oklahoma, Nebraska, the backyard brawl, Pittsburgh, and West Virginia. So
yeah, 100%.
And all these, and the last thing I'll tell you and get off the line to you guys is these programs got a reputation because they had people to beat around them. If they all get in together, they're not going to be too happy with 8-4, 9-3.
True.
Kind of thing.
True.
And Nebraska wasn't happy with that, and look where that's gone from that unhappiness with that. Every move they made since then made it a bigger struggle. They're farther away than they were before. So.
No, you brought some really good points up, Nat. We'll answer them here if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
We'll get them. I think you made some great points. The first point I've totally lost my train of thought. The first point he made the second point he made about recruiting, I didn't even think about this. Now you've got Texas A&M obviously in Texas, but now you can go in as Georgia and say, hey, look, you can come play in the SEC. You can play for Texas, who went 7-5 last year, and they're trying to pretty much start over in this conference. Or you can come play for an established team like Georgia, or I mean, Florida could do the same thing now. Alabama could do the same thing. I'm just thinking about you opening that market. And I don't know, Ben. Is the Oklahoma market that enticing? I mean, obviously they have great teams, but like the actual market of Oklahoma, I think that the SEC is doing this to add 2 teams, obviously, and they're adding 2 great teams in terms of overall academics and sports in all areas, not just football. We talk mainly about football here, but like Ben talked about, Oklahoma and Texas are no slouch in basketball.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at this, there's not a ton of kids that come out of Oklahoma in recruiting wise. Oklahoma has to go out of state most of the time to get their top kids. You're looking at this, and I'm just trying to put myself, I guess, in Kirby Smart's shoes or in Dan Mullen's shoes. And would I guess you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice, right? They can't just say, they can't go up to their ADs and say, hey, no, we're good, man. We don't want this. Nah, let's cancel the whole thing. I think it's been in the works for some time, and there's politics and money involved here that goes well beyond whether a head football coach wants them here or not. And that's not to say that, Kirby Smart and Nick Saban and the like don't want them here. They very well could, because it boosts their resume if they beat a top team like that. My thought is just like, if I was a head coach here, what does this do for me? That's my only thought.
Yeah. I look at it like he brought up, which is kind of sad that he brought it up, was about like Maryland, because obviously I'm up here. When they moved, I even said that was a terrible move. All the moves really are for money.
Oh, yeah, real. Absolutely, yeah.
There are fans, and I'll say I've listened to some people react who are very upset about this, and I understand why. There are going to be some people who love it and hate it, and I understand all the reasons for it. I get it, and it also depends on who you're a fan of and stuff like that. I get it 100%. But from Greg Sankey's perspective, he has to do this.
Oh, there's no question. Yeah.
Now, I did a check in revenue. Now, USC and Notre Dame don't dispose of it because they're private institutions. They don't really – those 2 big programs you have to figure are in here somewhere. But I looked – Texas is number 1 in revenue. Oklahoma's number 8. You add those schools, 7 of the top 10. Yes, USC and Notre Dame might be in the top 10 potentially.
Yeah. But for this they're not there.
We know of are in the SEC now, revenue-wise. That's you have to do that. And you look, those are 2 of the most established brands in college football and, to a degree, basketball. Those 2 schools, I kind of said the SEC is not elite at basketball because Kentucky was kind of down. Now you add those 2, they have more depth in basketball, and you add that. Now the weird thing, which I agree with you about the Oklahoma market, which I assume Texas A&M already kind of brought you into that market.
Yeah.
From that perspective, so. If the Big Ten goes after Kansas and something like that, they would go into Kansas. They're going into those areas. Geographically, it makes sense, and they are going to more states. But at the same time, the revenue from these schools and the talent of these schools, it's going up. Because I think it's starting to shape up depending on who goes where. The SEC is the football conference, and the Big Ten could turn into the basketball conference. That's what it's turning into, which I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic. But I agree with him 100%. When he brought up Maryland, Nebraska's been terrible in the Big Ten. They've been pathetic. West Virginia and Pitt, my best friend went to West Virginia, and he talks about, like, look, we're in the Big 12. It doesn't make sense. Like, you look at West Virginia geographically, they're traveling so far to play all these Big 12 teams, and their rivals are Pitt, Maryland, Virginia Tech. They're not playing any of them. Like, they should be in the ACC or Big 10. But the issue with some of these schools is they don't draw in a lot of money in the Big 12. Like, look at Kansas State. Look at TCU. Who's going to take some of these schools? I think Kansas is in a good position. I think Iowa State's in a decent position. But some of these schools, and Oklahoma State, I would say those 3 are in a good position, and to an extent Baylor, because they just won the basketball and have been competitive in football. But at least half these schools, we don't even know if they're going to be in a Power 4 or if it goes to
right.
Because outside of likely USC and total revenue that we know of, the highest school in the Pac-12 in revenue is Washington at 23. They're actually above Oregon, which surprised me. So I'm like the Pac-12 is not in a good position where if it did go to 3 conferences or 2, the Pac-12 is probably the next to be screwed, which shocks me because they have the entire West Coast. But they've done so bad in every sport. I mean, they've gone downhill in everything. It amazes me, but it's all about money. And some of these schools are risking being worse programs competitively for more money.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Mark Gibson says he's in Houston, Texas, and the sports stations here are going crazy with excitement and the fans wanting this to happen. Go Dogs. I think so. If you're invited to the table, at the table where college football runs everything, and you want to get your program back like Texas to that forefront, to where you were, to, you know, those Vince Young days where everything, you know, Texas was, it still is a huge brand. Longhorns, I mean, horns up is, everybody knows it. Horns down is just as popular now, it feels like, but both represent the school. You know, you're getting, I think I saw a Texas player say it where he said, look, if they're saying horns down, that means they're thinking of us. But horns up, horns down, whatever, everybody knows what that is. Just like everybody knows what Go Dogs is. I mean, it's just a saying, right? I mean, so I get where you could be excited you're entering into the SEC. Robert Piper says, with Mullen's recruiting prowess, I think this might be sarcasm here, this may be ultimately his death nail. It could. I mean, you bring in two schools like Oklahoma and Texas into the SEC, and you're trying to fight for those kids out of that state, and you're not known as a good recruiter. And I really think if you look at it from a whole, I don't know if this benefits Oklahoma a whole hell of a lot, because Oklahoma really was in a good position to make it to the college football playoff every year. Their schedule was easy. Yeah, obviously they Oklahoma'd, as the saying was, they Clemsoned a few games here or there, but you know, overall, Oklahoma was making the college football playoff. It felt like with Lincoln Riley there every year. And nobody was going to stop them until they got to the college football playoff. As for Texas, this is a move you need to make because you weren't doing anything in the Big 12. But I don't know. I don't see Texas coming over here. And I didn't see Texas A&M really boosting up as well as they did, Ben, to be honest, and be in the position they are now. Missouri obviously won the SEC East a couple of times. I mean, we're talking about two schools that I didn't think would do much. Texas A&M has really, you know, gone from almost it felt like a directional school out there in Texas to a primetime school once they joined the SEC. I'm curious to know what's going to happen with Texas on that. Dave McMahon says, Rodney Hampton was another UGA star from Texas. Jerry Dogs fan Matthew Stafford was the best player I can think of, the Georgia recruiter from Texas. So there are some players out there from Texas when we were talking about it earlier. And let's see. Jerry Dogs fan says, back to Dave, he was pretty good too. Guys, put your comments in the comment section. We're talking about how college football has changed right before our eyes, basically. We'd like to hear from you guys as well. 706-363-3773. I think we've touched on everything with that. I don't know what's going to happen in the coming weeks. I know the ACC, the Big Ten, they've got to be looking at the rest of the schools in the Big 12 to say, hey, can we scoop some of these guys up? Does the SEC look at it as like, hey, this is our time to shine. Let's get to 20. Let's get to 20 teams. We'll break off. We'll make our own playoff system. I mean, there's just so many ways this thing could go, Ben. I mean, it really, if you wanted to, and you were Greg Sankey and you said, hey, look, I'm sick of getting in the NCAA's way and them getting in our way, vice versa. Let me add Clemson, Florida State, Ohio State, and Michigan, and call it a day. What happens to college football after you add those four teams to the SEC? Do you rename the SEC just like the Premier League of college football and call it a day and put up your hands and say, look, we've done it. Who else is going to get into the playoffs? I don't know. It's crazy. It absolutely is crazy to me. But I want to move on to a Georgia topic real quick, Ben, and that's Branson Robinson's commitment to the University of Georgia. 5-star running back out of Mississippi. We saw him at Rivals Camp Atlanta. He was the star of the show. He showed up about halfway through registration, so about 100 kids had come in prior to Branson. He stole the show immediately when he showed up. He talked about how he deadlifts and power lifts and squats and bench presses, and he's almost unworldly when it comes to those things. You turn on his football tape, and he's almost unworldly at that as well. Ben, what is your take on Branson Robinson? How big of a commitment is this? And then where do the Dogs kind of move forward? Is the running back position done? What's going on there?
Well, for this class, it's done, barring something happening with Jordan James that we don't expect, or Branson, I don't know, we're decommitting, which we don't expect any of those things. So, yeah, this class is done. Dell's moving on to 2023 in terms of that position. But this was a big commitment. You're talking about the number one running back. He's the number 16 player in the country, top player from Mississippi. I believe he's the second player Kirby's landed from Mississippi. He might have landed a third one, but I know Nakobe Dean and him were both top players from that state. I think a lot of people look at Nick Chubb and see the similarities are there, especially with how they're built. And also, they're both kind of one-cut backs. His change of direction, his vision, his short area burst and acceleration is probably his best attribute outside of his strength. Now, when we were talking in the reaction video, I remember saying his pass catching ability, Roddy said he would run him 1,000,000 times, probably end his career before he would go to college and be selfish if he was his high school coach.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, you got the two things are probably his speed, which I think for running backs, and I know this might be a controversial take, but I think speed's a little bit overrated for running backs. Like when you look at a lot of things, like you want to be fast, but do you really have to have 4.3 speed or 4.4 speed to be a dominant running back? Derrick Henry, I understand he's big. He's not running that, but look how dominant he is. I think Chubb might be able to run low 4.4s somewhere in there. I believe Branson's 40 time listed by his high school was at 4.48. If that's accurate and he's in the 4.4s or even 4.5s with everything else he has to his game, he's perfect. He's perfectly fine. That's more than enough speed. I just think when you look at everybody, most running backs, minus like Saquon Barkley and those guys, aren't super fast backs. So when people want to talk about, does he have that ridiculous speed? No. His offense that he's in doesn't allow him to catch a lot of passes. But you look at the rivals' camps, and he was catching passes and looked clean and out of his breaks. He looks very good running and change of direction and everything. He has every attribute you need from a running back, except for that elite speed and just the pass catching ability, which I think it's in large part he has it. You just don't get to see it from his high school.
Well, I think also, like, you look at a guy like Todd Gurley or Nick Chubb, you never thought they had elite speed, but when they got on the field, they had elite field speed to where, like, Todd Gurley, it looked like he wasn't even running half the time, and he would be breaking away from folks. He would be taking off. Nick Chubb would bounce off of 2 tackles, and then he would take off. And yeah, they're not running 4.3s. They might be running high 4.4s. But you know, back when they were dogs, it was more power for them. They got through that first rush, and then they were able to, you know, scamper on to the next wave of defenders. Is that what you see in Branson? Who would you comp him to? I mean, I know everybody's saying Nick Chubb, right? And it's probably a good reason to, but also Nick Chubb is, you know, Georgia's leading rusher of all time, besides obviously Herschel. But you know, what do you see in him?
Well, I think if he develops pass catching, this is kind of a weird comp, but I would say Josh Jacobs is an interesting one to me.
I like
because
that.
they're built similar. Chris Carson's one I've heard people talk about from the Seahawks. He's another one, lower compact guy. You look at these guys' calves and you look at their pad level and some of these things, and it's off the charts. I just think that the short area burst and things like that remind me a lot of a Josh Jacobs in terms of the acceleration and the short area quickness. That's where I see a lot of that. But I think he needs to develop, like I said earlier, being a better pass catcher. But I just think with a lot of these guys, they say stuff like that. How good is he in the pass game? But this is something where I think he works well at Georgia. And I was telling this to Roddy and some of the other guys. When you look at Pro Football Focus, when Brent does that, pass pro for running backs is something they really value on PFF. That's why Nick Chubb was the #1 PFF running back his first 2 years in the NFL, was because in pass pro, Kirby and Georgia emphasized that a lot. You look at Branson, even in the camp setting and in the high school setting, he looked elite in that category already. It doesn't have to be overly developed. With guys like DeAndre Swift, he came in, they developed that in him over time, which he got to learn that from Chubb and Michelle. When you look at Branson, he comes in, he's going to play a similar style to what Kendall Milton does versus James Cook in terms of how he's going to run the ball. And you look at Kendall Milton later in the year. I remember in the Cincinnati game, they threw Kendall Milton some passes later in that year. Over time, they got more comfortable throwing him the ball and getting him out there in those situations. That's what it's going to be like with Branson. It's going to be very similar to how they're building up Kendall Milton. That's how I see it. Because what Georgia always needs to me is that thunder and lightning. Chubb, he's kind of would be the Chubb. They kind of need to get that Michelle with them, hoping that Jordan James could be that. Or next year, they're in it for the top 3 running backs in the 2023 class. They're in probably the top 2 or 3 for all of them, which is a really good position to be in early on. So Georgia right now, Del McGee's hit it out of the park at running back. The only interesting thing I would say about the running back room is Lavassier Carroll. Is he a running back or not? That's the only question I have.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, you're talking about thunder and lightning. Maybe you move LC back over next year, and he's kind of the lightning to Branson. You never know. We got some comments over here. Said, let's see. Dave McMahon says, what did he say? He said, good call on Josh Jacobs. I believe Chris Carson was a former dog verbal. Maybe Carson, little remnants of Carson in Branson Robinson. I know Carson was a verbal to Georgia before he ended up at Oklahoma State after his JUCO. But maybe some Chris Carson in Branson Robinson. I'm sure Georgia fans wouldn't mind that the way he's playing in the NFL. Tristan West says, good evening, everybody. Good evening to you, Mr. West. And says, most running backs have extraordinary vision quickness and a burst of speed. Yeah, that tells you everything you need to know about Todd Gurley. Extraordinary vision quickness. He had a burst of speed. He'd take off on you. Robert Piper says, Ben, how many receivers is Georgia looking to take this year? I know we're moving on from the Branson stuff here. Moving on to some comments. Dave's going to call in after you probably this question here. What's Georgia looking at? What is Georgia looking like at receiver? Lord, I can't get my words out tonight.
I would say 3 or 4, and I kind of always say this with Georgia numbers. One, I mean, everyone's going to take a guess of what the number is going to be for the class. I always do this early on. I just always assume 25. It's just the number that you just point to and just say that number. I don't assume Georgia's going to take a certain amount of transfers or not. Nobody would have predicted Georgia's taken 3 transfers, only signing 20 guys last year. Nobody would have predicted that at this time. So I'm going to go 25. It's going to be 3 or 4, and I always say this with DBs too. Georgia could take 5 or 6. D-linemen, they could take 3 or 4. Those are probably the 3 or 4 positions you look at and say the number can vary by 1. It depends on who they get. If you tell me right now, Luther Burden wants in, Andre Green wants in, we already know Denilon's committed, and they get a guy like Shaz Preston later in the year, they explode on offense, which is something I was going to get into. Georgia having a great season could flip momentum for a ton of recruits. He's a guy, suppose they have a big year on offense that people expect, you throw him in there. They would take those 4 in a heartbeat. But if you were to get Andre Green and Luther Burden, or you were to get 2 other guys, and they don't feel good about how the talent of the 4th other receiver compared to a 6th DB or a 4th D lineman, then they're probably only going to sit at 3. So it's going to be between that number, I believe. And right now, this upcoming weekend, as I said, this is probably the biggest recruiting weekend every year. I think I said that my first time I called in here. That last weekend of July is always open. It's the last time you get kids in on visits before the season starts. You get that momentum for August decisions and going into the season before games start. It's really important. And Georgia has virtually all of their targets coming into town this weekend that aren't their edge rusher targets, it seems. Everybody else is going to be in town this weekend, which is huge to get the last visit for all those guys. And Luther Burns, one of them, he said, I'm not visiting Oklahoma this week. I'm visiting Georgia only. And that's big to get a guy like that in town. So him and Andre Green and Dylan Bell and Shaz Preston and some of these guys. Jaden Gibson's going to be in town this weekend. People don't really bring him up much. Guys like that, maybe a flip down the road. Who knows if Kojo takes visits? We don't know that yet. He could take game visits in the fall. I know some kids take visits just to see the games in the fall.
Of course,
free ticket. So he might be in town for all we know. As of right now, that's not the case, but can't rule it out. Like a guy like Jermaine Burton, we didn't expect that. So, yeah, there's a lot of options there.
I think just overall, and I want to go back to, I know you touched on this briefly, and then you went away from it. You said 25 kids every year. I don't know. I really don't know if that's the number. And I we're just speculating here. I don't know if that's the number that George is looking at anymore. Just because there are so many kids now in the transfer portal, and there's so many good kids in the transfer portal that maybe you go into it and say, look, let's take 22 and let's take the best 22 we can get. Let's leave 3 spots open and let's try to get the 3 best transfers every single year, which I feel like they got at least 3 of the top 5. You could argue if they're the top 3 transfers this year. What other transfers off the top of your head would be even close to these 3 that Georgia got? I'm trying to think of I can't think of any. I'm sure I'm missing some. If guys in the comments, if you can think of a transfer that is going to be more impactful to its team than the 3 that came to Georgia, let me know. I can't think of any. But let's just.
D-Rob was hyped up. D-Rob was hyped up when he came in, but that didn't live up to it.
Well, I'm talking about this year to other schools.
Oh,
Georgia got Gilbert, they got Smith, and they got Kendrick. were there any other big time transfers that are going to make a huge difference for the new program that they went to this year? It's funny you mentioned D-Rob, though. He did transfer to Auburn, and Auburn is slotting him into, potentially being a starting wide receiver for them. But no, I'm just curious if now recruiting changes to say, hey, look, let's leave 3 spots open, and let's go get the 3 best kids that we still have relationships with. And Kirby Smart has said this time and time again, folks. I don't want to beat this down, but he said it numerous times. He says, look, we never end a relationship with a kid on a bad note because we never know where he's going to end up. He said it, the first time he said it was with Demetrius Robertson. Well, Demetrius made his way back to UGA. Then, lo and behold, they kept a great relationship with Gilbert. They told him, look, man, you've always got a home here. If something happens, look where he's at. He's never closed that door on anybody, and it just seems like to me he's speaking the truth on that because he's gotten kids to come back after they've gone to different programs. Let's see. We've got some comments here. DeMarcus Bowman to UF. Clifton Royal says that could be a big one. And then
I would say any team that gets a quarterback.
Yeah.
Just type of thing. I think
sure.
Utah took. I remember the quarterback who went to Duncanville, who's a high-rated recruit, who went to Texas. He transferred out. And Charlie Brewer, the quarterback for Baylor. I think both transferred to Utah. And the starting quarterback for Oregon, Tyler Shaw, went to Texas Tech.
Yeah. Shaw could be a big one. Shaw could be a big one.
So anytime you see a starting quarterback go to whether it's a big or lower program by your standards, I mean, if he's going to be a starter, you would have to think that's the only one that makes sense.
We've got a couple
bigger
people
than these guys.
We've got a couple people in the chat says Tua. The kid from Tennessee that transferred to Bama. That's a big get. That's a big get at linebacker.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. But so even if we take those two, DeMarcus Bowman and Tua, or we move in Shaw into one of those, I still think Georgia got 3 of the top 5 in terms of transfers this year. I don't think you could really argue that. Robert Piper says, agree on the portal spots. Kirby can sell those guys on UGA. I think he saves them for the player that Georgia loses on that Georgia didn't expect to. Exactly right. I think you hit the nail on the head, Robert. I think you're going to start seeing classes become a little bit smaller, but it's only going to help, these other small-time schools. And I mentioned this with Blaine Gilmer a couple of shows ago when NIL was huge, right? I mentioned this with him. I said, look, your Kentuckys of the world, they're going to move up a little bit, Ben. I'm telling you right now, because these other schools, let's say Georgia and Alabama and the likes, right? The top schools start only.
I think it helps USC the most.
Right. So they start. You're talking about South Carolina?
No, I'm talking about like the Trojans, because you look NIL, you could sell kids on South California, like some of the
sure, yeah.
Deals. I'm talking about that.
But what I'm saying,
that's going to have an impact because those kids won't be coming to the East Coast now.
Right.
Look at 2020, DJ, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud. They could be the starting quarterbacks for Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson this year. All 3 were quarterbacks in California.
Yeah.
And if you could have sold one of them on, we're going to grow this thing, but also we have these opportunities for you in your home state, this big market, you could have kept one of them home, So that's one. Also, before we go back to your point, I want to bring up, like, when I talked about 25 earlier, I say whenever I enter a class, I just think 25.
Yeah.
Now, that number's not going to be right because, look, Alabama took 28. I think someone said Louisville might take like 12 or 13 high school kids, some that low.
Yeah.
Like, I think people are assuming Miami's not even coming close.
Yeah, no, Miami is just there's the transfer portal. That's all they do.
Just my mindset of 25, just that
right.
number. I always think, okay, but it's likely going to be less. Maybe some years it could be more for all we know. It really depends on if they miss on their high-profile targets. I think the one position they're going to take in the portal this year is going to be outside linebacker. If you lose Nolan Smith and Adam Anderson, and your only 2 pure outside linebackers are Sherman and Chambliss, and you have some other guys who can move over there, even if you land your elite targets in recruiting, you need a guy who can come in day one. So that's a position where it's like, okay, you miss on guys recruiting here. Okay, we're going to land those needs in the transfer portal. Oh, we did really bad last year. Was it DB? Missed on Arnold, and I think Tony Grimes.
Yeah.
Classified. But that one was kind of out of their hands. Or else they probably would have landed him. They got Terrian, what's his name? They got Tyke Smith and Darian Kendrick. So that's the thing now. The transfer portal will be a counter for recruiting misses. So I think, George, that's why I wouldn't worry too much about a couple recruiting misses.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that it's going to just be interesting. The point I was making, though, was these classes get smaller. schools like South Carolina, Kentucky, they drag in those last, high 3-star, low 4-star kids that the classes they got to the certain point in UGA's class and they couldn't take those kids. And then you start adding into the portal, you start adding NIL in. I think the conference parity, I think it's going to, disappear a little bit because these other schools are going to be able to sell NIL money and sell playing time just as much, if not more, than Georgia in some cases, especially in playing time. It's going to be interesting to see how recruiting kind of shapes up and shapes out. And I think I don't want Georgia fans to get discouraged if they miss on a high-profile kid, because I think you're going to start seeing that. You're going to see more high-profile kids kind of spread their wings, if you will, to other programs with NIL taking shape, especially if they can go somewhere like Bryce Young at Alabama and make $1 million, like Nick Saban said. You come be the starting quarterback at Kentucky, and look here, we got Colonel Sanders waiting on you. He wants you to be the spokesman for Kentucky Fried Chicken. You come be the quarterback here, man. We got $1 million for you. You talk about honey biscuits, I don't know. I don't know what the next step is, man. But there's enough out there to say that. Mike Free says watching from Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, man. Appreciate that. I think I think Mike Free started at the beginning and he's now commenting now. And he doesn't know we're live, but he's talking about Texas. He says we, as in the SEC, don't need the Texas Shorthorns. So I like that. The Shorthorns. I like that.
Shorthorns.
Let's see. Clifton Ryle says, I watched some of the FSU spring game and they were raving about Jermaine Johnson. Very true, Clifton. They even brought Jermaine Johnson to the ACC media days. So that shows how highly they liked him. I like Jermaine Johnson. I loved him in Last Chance U. He was a fan favorite in that. And then he committed to Georgia. Everything about him I liked. I liked his game a ton. I was really, really impressed with his film in terms of that. But anyways, Dave McMahon, if you're watching, give us a call, man. I know you're going to be talking about these Olympics and these UGA dogs. I've got you ready right here. Overall, though, man, college football's changed. We know that. Yeah. Next week, we might be talking about something completely different, Ben, because next week, who knows? There might be 4 new teams that want to join the SEC. This might just be an arms race to see which conference can get to 21st, and then they're going to be the premier conference. Let me put something to you here, and while we're waiting on Dave, a hypothetical, if you will. If the SEC and I think this is Dave calling. Hold that thought. I want to ask you this question. You're on with Paul and Ben on UGA Sports Call-In Show. Is this Dave McMahon?
It is Dave McMahon.
Dave McMahon, how is it going, my friend?
It is going pretty darn well. It's in the middle of looking some stuff up. I was looking up some football for a later article, but I was enjoying the show between you and Ben. Good job, y'all.
Hey, appreciate it. What do you have on the line for us tonight, Dave?
Okay, you wanted me to talk a little bit about the Olympics because a lot of people on the dog pen are talking about the Olympics. Well, it's a good reason. Georgia already has 5 medals in the Olympics. If they were their own country,
wow.
It would be tied for 5th right now.
Wow.
With Korea and Italy. So we're Georgia's tied right there. In the 2016 Olympics, they only had 10 medals, which is still pretty impressive. So they're already halfway there. So good for them. Georgia won the first gold for the United States was a Georgia boy. Chase, I don't want to butcher his last name, but Chase K, I'll call him.
I think it's Kayla's. I think it's Kayla's. I think
he's from my hometown.
Really?
My hometown.
Okay.
Nice.
Good.
He is
nice. I mean, if you don't remember him, he was on Coach Farrelly's team a couple years ago. I believe he's like a 13-time All-American, 8 full-time All-Americans, and 5 honorable mention All-Americans, which is somewhere like about 10th or 11th or 12th all-time on Georgia's swim team. So it shows you how impressive the swim team is.
I was going to say, that's 10th all-time? Good Lord.
Yeah. Georgia's swim team has 36 medals in the history of the Olympics. So, that's
wow.
I love that fact. And it's all led by Allison Smith. She has 8 of Olympic medals, including 4. And she has 4 gold medals, and she's going to be in 2 events this year, so she can increase that total. 4 gold medals is actually tied for the most by a Georgia athlete. The other one with 4 gold medals, Teresa Edwards of the women's basketball team, which I think basketball is basketball is a lot more difficult to get gold medals than swimming, because swimming you could be in a crazy amount of events, but basketball you're just getting 1 per year. I mean,
right.
You have the 3x3, the 3-on-3 tournament, but they didn't have that back in Teresa's day. But yeah, 4 gold medals for Teresa, so she's obviously that's pretty darn incredible. Wise, and I mean Georgia doesn't have any men's hoops players this year, obviously, because the team, who knows. But but Georgia does have a gold medal in its history when Vern Fleming had a gold medal on the 1984 team. He was one of the stars on the '84 Olympic gold medal team. And I mean, other people, I guess, like Vern carried on his back include people like Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin,
Yeah,
and everybody's fan favorite, John Koncak was on that 1984 Olympic team for the USA that won the gold medal. So it's 4 gold medals for Allison Smith, 4 gold medals for Teresa Edwards, and then Georgia had 3 gold medals by Gwen Torrance, a track star for Georgia. Georgia has there's 13 medals that Georgia track has won all the time, including 6 gold medals, and 3 of those 6 gold medals in the history track was by Gwen Torrance. The only one medal that a Georgia men's track guy got was a guy named Speck Towns. Now, if you don't remember Speck Towns, you see his name all over.
I was going to say the track's named after him, right?
The track is named after Speck Towns. Forrest was his real name, Forrest Speck Towns. He won a gold medal in the 1936 games back in Berlin. I mean, everyone remembers Jesse Owens, but Speck Towns also had a gold medal. Speck Towns was also, he was a football player for Georgia, but Speck Towns was the head coach on Georgia track from 1939 to 1974, which I think that's incredible. How long can you picture?
It's 5 decades, right?
36 years, like 5 different decades.
5 different decades.
Yeah, so that won't. I don't think that you won't see that happen too often anymore. In that, he was also a football assistant coach from 1940 to 1960. So I mean, just think how crazy that is for being an assistant football coach for 21 years or so. But also, if you want to talk a little bit more Olympics, you got Georgia also has a diver in the Olympics. They have a former golfer, a former golf dog is in the Olympics, and a tennis player is in the Olympics. So that's pretty darn good. Georgia does not have a gym dog, although the head coach Courtney Kupets was a former Olympian. She had a bronze medal and a silver medal in the Olympics prior to coming to Georgia. That's what happens a lot with gymnastics. A lot of them do the Olympics first, and then they go to the college. Because I talked to a former gymnast, and she said that she loves that because when she goes to college, she feels like it's so much easier than training for Olympics because you're only practicing like 20, 30, 40 hours a week or so. I guess for the Olympics, you're practicing like 50 or 60 or 70 or 80.
Right.
Who knows? Georgia does not have a baseball player in the Olympics because there's no baseball anymore in the Olympics. Although the Olympics does have breakdancing, which confuses me. But there's no. But there's no.
They didn't call on you for that, Dave?
I left my boombox back home, so I can't participate.
None of this 3v3 basketball, Dave. I saw that 3v3 basketball now Olympics.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Any bulldog in there?
Either.
No, there's no dog in that.
No dog in that. You think for the next Olympics, me, Paul, and Ben, you think the 3 of us should try out for it or so?
Man, it looked from what I saw, Dave, that 3-on-3 Olympic basketball looked pretty intense. Like there's some hard fouls in that. Like it's not your standard like basketball. It was like kind of like almost elbows to the neck. I mean, it was
okay.
It's not make it take it either, which I find strange.
Which is perfect because that's the way I play. But I mean I mean I don't particularly care for 3-on-3 basketball in the Olympics. I think that's more of like something you do in a park, not necessarily an Olympic sport. And same thing goes with skateboarding because I think skateboarding is that. I mean that's the reason there's X Games so you could do that. But I mean I just think they're putting more and more events that people want to see in events instead of like real sport like Olympic type sports. And so that's my opinion about that. Going back to the baseball thing, also in the 1936 Olympics, baseball was an exhibition sport back then, and Henry Wagner was an Olympic on that 1936 team, also a Georgia dog. He had many offers after college to play professional ball, but instead of that, he played. He became a teacher, which is very commendable. But I don't see too many people turning down professional sports to become teachers. So good for him, wise. Now, here's the part I want to talk about, and here's my trivia questions, which I'm switching to football because I don't think you might not know the Olympic stuff, so I'm switching to football for trivia question for both of you. Earlier on the chat, Jerry Dog, Sam, and I were talking about Bulldogs from Texas, and we included Matthew Stafford and we included Rodney Hampton. I don't know all the players in the history that went that are from Oklahoma, but there's two players that are pretty well connected with Georgia football in the last 50 years that are both from Oklahoma. Can you name the two Bulldogs that are from Oklahoma that are big-time athletes that most true Georgia Bulldog football fans should know about?
Jim Donnan?
No, I don't, he's not from Oklahoma. Obviously, he coached there.
Family's from Oklahoma, I think.
What did you say?
I think it's Jim Donnan's family's in Oklahoma. I don't know if he's from there.
Okay, so two.
But Donnan, I believe, is from North Carolina, and he was obviously assistant there under Barry Switzer's teams that were dominant.
You're saying you're saying two.
I think players, not coaches.
Players, yeah.
From Oklahoma in the last 50 years.
50 years that every Georgia Bulldog fan should know.
Ooh.
I have. Can you give me a decade?
One was in the 2000s, early 2000s, and one was in the 1980s.
Oh man, I'm gonna feel real dumb when I don't know these, Ben.
Oh, I feel like I am too. Oh, I'm not. No, Ben Watson is from Georgia. I'm trying to think. Early 2000s. Something's telling me it's a receiver.
Ben Watson's from, I believe, South Carolina. I think he's Rock Hill, South Carolina, I believe.
Okay. Just tell us, Dave. I have no idea.
Okay. In the 2000s, a guy named Michael Johnson, the guy who caught the pass from David Green in the 2002 Auburn game, and not the Michael Johnson, the Olympic star, so kind of good combination there. And in the 1980s, a guy that we talked about last week, Bill Goldberg.
Really?
Oh.
Really?
So Goldberg is from Tulsa as well, so that's the answers. And so I enjoyed my time. I enjoyed my time talking to both of y'all, and
you stumped us again. You stumped us Schwab again.
Yeah, and then what's it called? If you want, let's see. One quick question on something. Someone's texting me on something that might be another question about that people should know.
Oh God, these are regular people. This is not me. I'm terrible at trivia, Dave.
Yeah.
I'm not good.
Okay. One thing I wanted to speak, and you know what you're also terrible at, is spelling. Because on the line right now, who is Dave McMahon? my name has O-N at the end, not A-N.
Oh, my bad.
And I know that's okay. And Tristan West on a message board is saying Mark Rick. Mark Rick was actually born in Nebraska, not in Oklahoma. So, but it's pretty close to those things. But I appreciate the time, you all.
I can't believe I misspelled that, Dave. I've spelled it right for 20 years now. It feels like.
It feels like, but you spelled it right on the topic. So I guess that's all that matters. But I appreciate Ben. Keep up the good work. I love your commentary, and Paul, you're the master at this. So keep it on, and hopefully we'll have some good stuff for next week.
All righty, Dave. Take it easy, my man.
All right, have a good one.
See you.
Take care, Dave.
Man, I totally just botched his name.
Bill Goldberg, I felt like I would know.
I had no clue on either.
Bill Goldberg, I felt like I knew
he came with the tough stuff on the trivia this time. I'm gonna have to get on him.
I think it's harder when you go in the 80s and 90s. Like
yeah, man, you go before 2000.
Where guys from, it's got to be recent memory. If you're going like a stat on who's gonna like touchdown pass, stuff like that, yeah, you could probably go back then, but otherwise.
Yeah, right. Let's see here. What did we miss in the chat? Oh, Tristan West says, Paul, breaking news. Some guys reporting that Texas and Oklahoma have just met with the Big 12. The report says they will continue their dialogue. Will they stay in the Big 12? I was looking that up while Dave was talking, and it looks like Nicole Auerbach's reporting that the Big 12 Conference Executive Committee, consisting of Big 12 Board of Directors Chairman and Texas Tech University Presidents and Baylor University President and Commissioner Bob Bowlesby, will met by video conference Sunday afternoon with University of Oklahoma President and University of Texas President Jay Hartzell. The meeting was cordial, quote, and the executive committee expressed a willingness to discuss proposals that would strengthen the conference and be mutually beneficial to OU and UT, as well as the other member institutions. I cannot talk tonight, Ben. I don't know. As well as the other member institutions of the conference, Bowlesby stated. I expect that we will continue our conversations in the days ahead, and we look forward to discussing thoughts, ideas, and concepts that may be of shared interest and impact. So it sounds like Texas and Oklahoma are meeting with the Big 12. I think this is a done deal, though. I think this is a last-ditch effort of the Big 12 to really, I guess, Tristram, to try to save their conference. I mean, if you think about it, you lose these two teams, you're down to 8. You don't really have a conference. You can't play for a conference championship in college football. I don't know. I think this is a last-ditch effort. I guess it's one of those things where it's a cordial type deal, Ben, where you're like, hey, we'll meet with you, but we're not going to date. I think of you more as a friend now. Maybe that's kind of the look of it.
I think they're just listening.
Yeah.
I think because otherwise, like, if you sit there and they're like, we're going to offer you up more money, well, we'll look at that. We'll listen. But I don't think when you look at the Big 12, and we were talking about it earlier, if Texas and Oklahoma come in, 7 of the top 10 are SEC schools. Long term, especially, you look at it, the money long term you're going to make, no matter what offer I think the Big 12 throws, it's going to work because I believe it's close to, the SEC makes close to double the amount of money the Big 12 does.
Yeah.
And that includes the Big 12 actually being a really good basketball conference and the SEC not. And you look at Texas and Oklahoma coming in and saying, well, we can expand your basketball and we would probably draw on more revenue there. We could be more competitive in one of the two big sports in our conference we're in now. The other one, we're probably going to still, at least one of us has a good chance of making the playoff now with the 12-team playoff. I look at it and saying there's, outside of the competition in football for Texas early on, there's really nothing that would make me say no. There really isn't if I'm them, because the money, I don't see how they could come up with the money. I think they're going to say, okay, we may spread you a bigger piece of the pie. But when you think about it, it's going to make the other schools in the Big 12 look weak. So your conference is going to look weaker to me when the other schools are probably not going to get as high of a percentage, because otherwise they would have already, spread out the money more, whatever the case may be. So the other Big 12 is going to be weak. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons they left, because the Big 12 is so weak in football and they're not drawing the revenue. So I just think it is a last-ditch effort, and out of respect, because they were in there for so long. And if you're going to talk, we're going to increase the amount of money, of course they're going to listen. But I don't think it's going to be enough. I just don't.
And Ben, before we go real quick, got to shout out our sponsor, Mainstay Construction. Give them a call, 678-539-0597 for all your roofing, gutter, and siding needs in Northeast Georgia. And those guys will treat you well. I know it for a fact because it's my company. So, guys, 678-539-0597. Those guys at Mainstay will treat you right. Ben, great show, man. My AirPods are buzzing, saying that I have about 5 seconds left before they go off. Any last words here before we go about this whole college football, SEC change, potentially, Branson Robinson's commitment, the show in general, anything to look forward to for Georgia fans in the coming days before next Sunday's show?
Yeah, outside of the Texas-Oklahoma, I just think people, you would have to watch some of our reporters at Yahoo and some of these other places to see, what's being reported out there and follow, because the information seems like, is changing a lot. Done deal. This is when it's going to get done. Big 12 trying to last-ditch effort, try to expand their conference, whatever it is. I would just follow that. And then when it comes to Georgia specifically, this recruiting weekend that we currently have confirmed, or at least expected visitors so far, is as big as I've seen. 4 top 10 prospects in town this weekend, potentially. That is something I've never seen Georgia do, who are not committed to Georgia, too. They're committed elsewhere prospects. Their top safety and O-line targets as well, in addition to those guys, will be in town, along with some really good 2023 kids, among other targets, and almost all their commits. So probably the biggest recruiting weekend for the Bulldogs, and we'll probably be talking about that next week, among potentially if there were to be a commitment or more Texas-Oklahoma news. So just stay tuned to that.
As always, guys, we appreciate you so much for joining us. If you would, hit that like button on this video when you get done watching us, man. It really helps boost this video so that other folks can watch this video just like you did live. We appreciate it so much. We appreciate our sponsors. We appreciate Dave McMahon calling in. Nat called us in from Marietta earlier. Mark Gibson, Robert Piper, Danny Blackman, Lloyd Dog, Jerry Dogs Fan, Ohio Dog, Brett Weimer, Clifton Riles, Stephen Braswell, Mark Gibson, Robert Piper, Dave McMahon, Tristan West, Mark Gibson, Cool Cell, Clifton Riles, Mark Free, all of you guys, man, we appreciate you so much for chiming in over there in the comment section. We cannot wait. We cannot wait till football season starts, guys. It's just around the corner. My mind is still in the past. Summer camp will be here before we know it. Our own Anthony Dasher will be covering that for you in depth over at UGASports.com, getting as much practice notes out to you as possible. Who's going to be a starting offensive line? Things of that nature. If you want to know who we think is going to be the starting offensive line, go to UGASports.com and read Roddy Nabolsi's Georgia 3-2-1 report. He's got his prediction in there as where it stands right now. Also a ton of big nuggets in that 3-2-1 report as well. Guys, as always, we thank you so much for joining us. Catch us next week at 7:30. And as always, thank you so much. Ben, thank you. And we will see you guys on the next one.